Some progress already been made at COP26. Now more than 100 countries have agreed to cut emissions by 2030. And now the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is today going to try and force Britain's biggest companies to go green.
The key is how effectively we can follow through with these promises. Joining us live now is the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, John Glen. Very good morning to you. We've seen lots of positive words coming out of this conference already and some targets and pledges, but there are constant contradictions. For example, the fact that Boris Johnson flying back from Glasgow to London rather than taking the train. Rishi Sunak, who's going to be hosting today, cutting the tax on domestic flights, which leads to an increase in flying, and we know that that causes more emissions in both those cases than alternative forms of transport. The thing about this is that we have to make tough decisions individually, don't we? And at the moment, the government seems to be, you know, this old thing about do as I say, not as I do.
Well, I don't accept that narrative. Last week in the budget, the government brought forward 30 billion of investment into measures to green our economy and to transition. But what today we're announcing is that we want the UK, where we have a massive financial services sector, to be the first aligned to net zero financial centre in the world.
Sorry, you're not addressing
the... What we've seen over the last 18 months
Mr. Glen, you're not addressing the basic question there. You're talking about something else which we would like to talk to you about, but it really would be good if you just answer the question. What Susanna's saying is it's just not a good look, is it, to see the British Prime Minister coming back from this conference of all conferences on a private jet. That's the point. Could you just address that?
Well, I'll address both the points. The Prime Minister obviously has quite different time pressures to most other people. He's flying using the best aviation fuel that he can, which is offset. Obviously, in an ideal world, he wouldn't be in a position where he has that time schedule, but he is the Prime Minister and he has other commitments. On the APD point, we have halved the rate for intra-UK regional airports taxes, but we've increased the rate for extra long-haul taxes. So we have also made provision for the absolute concern around the direction of travel that we need to go in. And
so the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts that halving that tax on domestic flights means almost 400,000 extra passenger journeys a year. We've been talking about, we have this methane emissions pledge, 30% reduction. For instance, we know that there's been a discussion about whether we should increase tax on beef in order to reduce methane. Increasing taxes, as you suggest with long-haul flights, is a disincentive to people, which helps us to restrict our activity and lower emissions. You haven't done that with domestic flights, and that's where you're accused of being a little hypocritical. Yeah,
but we have done it for extra long-haul flights. So when you take those two measures together, and of course extra long-haul flights produce much more of a challenge to emissions in the environment, we've also got to deal with the interconnectivity around the United Kingdom. But absolutely, the big picture is we need to move to renewable sources of fuel and energy. And that's what we've got to do. And I hope you'll be able to ask me about what we're announcing today.
Well, then, what are you going to be announcing today?
Well, what we're announcing today is that we have got 450 companies that are committed to net zero by 2050. But to address some of the challenges that you just put to me about greenwashing and scepticism over that journey, what we're announcing today is a transition pathway. We're going to pull together a task force over the next 12 months that's going to actually make mandatory the steps that companies will need to publish to show how they're going to get to net zero by 2050. An enormous amount of assets now are committed under the umbrella of a net zero goal. But what we've got to do is ensure that the regulations and the transition pathway to that goal is clear and transparent to the public, and that the reporting of that is clear. So we're bringing together academics, regulators, government officials, third sector representatives in order to establish what that looks like. And that's an urgent piece of work this month.
Can we talk to you about something with a much shorter term deadline? And that is what is being described as a potential catastrophe in our care sector. 60,000 care workers may literally lose their jobs on November the 11th because they haven't been double vaccinated. Is it time to reconsider this policy, let us get through the winter, perhaps persuade more people, and bring this deadline in the spring? Because we have already failed our care sector over the pandemic. We cannot afford to lose that many care workers.
Well, the care sector and the care workers, as we all know, do a fantastic job. The challenge of actually providing the workforce needed to deal with the needs of the country over the coming months is something that the Health Secretary is engaged with in terms of the recruitment campaign that he has started. I mean, decisions about the process for double jabbing are not ones that I will be able to make, but it will be ones that government will be looking at, as we always do, on a rolling basis.
But you won't be aware of this because you were making your way for this interview, but we have literally 10 minutes ago spoken to two very, very senior, very level-headed senior members of the care industry in this country, and they are both really worried about this. And they are predicting, as a matter of fact, that if this deadline isn't moved back, then some care homes in about a week's time are going to shut. They're going to close, and the people inside them are going to be wheeled out and crammed into the homes that are still allowed to be open. This deadline has to go back, doesn't it? You simply can't stick with it.
Well, these are decisions that the Health Secretary will be making in consultation with other ministers over the coming days. And obviously, we listen very carefully to the views of respected professionals that you've just mentioned. But forgive me, I haven't seen their remarks and I can't really comment in detail.
Right. And OK, fair enough. One last question to you. This stacks into something we were talking about at length yesterday and today, and we've had one of the biggest responses, I think, we've ever had from Good Morning Britain viewers, and that's this issue of the so-called smart motorways. There is a growing call for the whole idea of smart motorways to be rolled back and we get our hard shoulders back, because these live lanes that used to be the hard shoulders are, without question, turning out to be death traps. Now, we know a Common Select Committee yesterday has stopped any more rollout of the so-called smart lanes, and they are now saying that, that they'll reconsider the whole thing. What do you think personally? You must use motorways. Do you think they're dangerous?
Well, I use the train quite a lot, but I am aware of the Transport Select Committee's report, and the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, will be looking at that report, and the government will have a fixed short time frame to respond to it. Obviously, they've raised a number of concerns, and of course, we will need to respond to those properly in due course.
Because it's so counterintuitive, isn't it? It really is counterintuitive.
I just wonder whether, John Glen, because, you know, you're there at the Treasury, which is in charge of the money, is it the case that so much money has been committed to this programme that it's seen as a sunk cost, frankly, and you don't want to roll back from it? Because I think that's what people are thinking.
Yeah. Well, select committees, as you know, do a fantastic job of scrutinising government. And it's really important that they will have done a detailed inquiry, bringing in lots of evidence together. It's really important that the government and the transport ministers look seriously at that report that I think was only published yesterday, and then respond in due course. I'm not a transport minister, so I'm not going to be able to speak to you about something outside of my responsibilities, but clearly I do know that the government will take it seriously.
OK, well, look, thank you for your time. We're out of time. Thanks for joining us.